Okay, so welcome to another very long reading. This one is called Mental Associations from the Origins of Man and the Universe, page 240, 241, and 242. Let's start right away with this one. Or let me just say one thing. Basically, I am skipping through the book and just getting some golden nuggets out of it here and there. Obviously, that's not the right way. For people to really grasp all these parts, it would be better to read the entire book. However, obviously, I can't do a 300-something page book. It would take me, hours and hours and hours to read through it. But so I'm skipping on things, and therefore some of the words are not explained in context of what they're being used. For example, here we're talking about objectively and things like that, which is not completely fair because we haven't read the chapter on what objective perceiving is. But anyway, I'm going to read these parts the way they are now separately, and it's up to you to read the entire book in sequence, let's say, in the order it was written, let's say. So this one's called Mental Associations. As the ego, we are unable to make sense of anything in isolation. Each of us perceives individual objects not as themselves, but in association with other objects. That is, partially and historically. Everything is placed in a context of past, grouped in the subtle memory with other objects previously named and remembered, which themselves had been subject to the same time-slotting process right back to our earliest infantile perceptions. Everything is strung along the line of time in the past so as to be understood. That means giving each object or condition a selective relationship to other objects which the thing itself does not have. By doing this, we create reasonable significance, one thing pointing towards another. Association. Cause and effect, continuity, or in other words, historicity. Whether we are awake or asleep, the ego is ceaselessly active in our memory, slotting and reslotting even the most trivial perceptions into some reasonable context. With the habit of years, it gains an insane sort of tempo like a chattering idiot whose aimless jabbering is often heard on the edge of sleep. Outwardly, it is repeated in the aged and senile when the restraints and need of practical performance have broken down. For all of us, what began as the necessary business of establishing a functional memory degenerates sooner or later into an involuntary nightmare, which is the uncontrollable, restless mind. To begin perceiving objectively, we have to release ourselves from the instinctive associative and grouping habit. We have to start observing objects without subtly connecting them. We have to start observing objects without subtle connection through the past or future, and without being afraid. For if we succeed, even for an instant, we are on the edge of eternity, where nothing familiar in time exists and awful loneliness or emptiness can be sensed. It will be obvious from this that thought, as the associative function, is time. So to start being really objective, we have to learn to interrupt the automatic naming or thinking process. We must thrust our intelligence in between what the senses present and the normal aimless egoic reaffirming of what is seen. The ego must no longer be allowed to identify things habitually and think indiscriminately in the subtle memory as it does all the time when we have nothing particular on our mind. This means that for a long while ahead, we can never really relax as we have in the past. We must be uncompromisingly vigilant. Not allow one aimless movement of thought in our heads. We have to stay in the now. See only what the senses are presenting every moment without judgment or subtle discrimination, and denying any memory reference whatever, unless it is to find the fact to carry out practical action. We must commit ourselves to not discussing or relating past events. We will fail frequently, but we must not be discouraged. For even to be discouraged is a sign of the egoic interference, reference to the past. Life is now, and for the purpose of discovering its objectivity, its deathlessness, we will never run out of time. We must be patient and resolute, never naming failure, but forgetting it by staying in the now and trying to do better next time, which is now anyway. We have to be very honest with ourselves. We seldom need to refer to the past, even to yesterday. And if we do, we're probably fooling ourselves, or the ego is fooling us. In the first 21 years of our life, we have done most of the naming we ever need to do. What we have to do now is dissolve the thick layer of past that has been built up over and obscured the impersonal point in our psyche through which we must go forward into increasing objectivity or reality to finally arrive at the one real, undivided and undividing being that each of us really is. So that is mental associations, clearly explaining how the time-slotting process of thinking in association, which is the mental structure of the ego slotting everything and categorizing everything and putting everything into a somewhat order, is actually keeping us from being able to perceive directly. And once we are mature enough, we have to actually get rid of this infantile system of slotting, of always being busy trying to, categorize and work things out and think about things. This useless thinking process which brings most people to the spiritual life. Most spiritual endeavor is because people have gone crazy about the storytelling in their own head. However, to undo that, we have to be able to rest as nothing. We have to rest as the eternal being of now without having to always verbalize and categorize. Like Alan Watts calls it, I think. He says basically the bringing into words, always trying to bring things in a descriptive way, describing it through language. They're signifiers, he calls them. We're always trying to bring things into a signifier. When I say table, it's not actually a thing. It's just a description. It's a sign. It's a descriptive function. Language is just describing things. It's not the thing itself. And so we have to stop doing that, even also the images, and to really become objective so that we have to interrupt this process and we can rest as this silent, still place of ever-present, eternal being. This is the being which we must get comfortable in again, so that once we get comfortable enough without having to constantly verbalize and think and work out through the past, which doesn't exist right now, but the process of memory trying to work things out, we can actually rest as what we truly are, which is this ever-present eternal being of pure, silent, still, pure perception. So that's Mental Associations by Barry Long from The Origins of Man in the Universe on page 240, 241, and 242.